Thank you for joining us for VaxTalks. I'm Brad Satin, and today we're joined by Dr. Stephen Luber, retired clinical pediatrician, associate clinical professor at the University of Washington Medical School. He published an emergency medicine report in a peer-reviewed journal on influenza, and he's also a board member of We Vax. Dr. Luber, thanks so much for joining us.
Thanks for the invitation.
So today we're talking about the seasonal flu, and with all eyes these days, at least for the last, year and a half, focused on COVID, the flu seems to have gone unnoticed. Yet we do know the CDC says about 36,000 people die of the flu every year. So how concerned are you, and how concerned should we be of the flu?
It was interesting that the steps taken to control COVID virtually eliminated influenza from our medical scene in the last year. It disappeared in March 2019. The steps of decreased international travel, masking, social distancing, closing of schools essentially eliminated influenza from our scene to the point where the CDC had trouble tracking numbers of cases. With the relaxation due to current optimism about the pandemic, the relaxation of these steps is setting the stage for a reoccurrence and reemergence of influenza, and perhaps even more significant than in past, because we did not have the benefit of the yearly exposure to influenza, which we all had, which builds up a community immunity that we're not having the benefit of this last year. A typical year, anywhere from 20 to 60,000 deaths, 30 to 40 million cases, 400 to 500,000 hospitalizations. It's a serious illness for which we have both vaccination and treatment. So the numbers are almost a tragedy that we don't pay enough attention to it.
So what causes the flu and what causes it to spread? The same way COVID does?
Influenza is an RNA virus, but one that changes continuously. It has a thing called Antigenic Drift, where it just changes to the point where each year the CDC and the World Health Organization get together to try and decide which strain is going to emerge as the principal problem that year and tailor the vaccine to it. Vaccine immunity lasts 6 to 12 months with the vaccines. And if they do make a good estimate of what is going to be circulating that year, then efficacy is anywhere between 50 to 90%. The problem is that it is a judgment call of what is going to be circulating, often based on evaluation of what is circulating in the southern hemisphere the year before. There's no influenza circulating. So this year, they're judging that they're going to use the same essential strains in the vaccine as they used the year before, minor modifications. But there is no way to be absolutely sure each year what is going to be the circulating strain.
Do you think that's one of the reasons people are hesitant to get it? I mean, we do hear of people getting the flu shot, and then they say they got the flu.
There's a lot of what we call influenza-like illness, which people call the flu. And the flu has a generic quality to it that anyone who gets sick say they had the flu. Those who've had influenza recognize there is a difference. Influenza has been likened to be hit by a truck. You have a high fever, you got a pronounced cough, massive muscle aches and pains, and you really feel ill. But unfortunately, the word flu in our contemporary society just implies someone who doesn't feel well that day, and they get over it in the day and they think that's the flu. Influenza is very different.
And so even if it is an inexact science, it's still important to get that flu shot every year.
Correct. The number of hospitalizations that we've talked about, deaths that we've talked about, are very significant and could explode if we do not sufficiently address influenza. It's a nightmare at CDC now that with relaxation, influenza could come and start to emerge this summer because of the relaxation of public health measures. before people even get their seasonal vaccination.
So do you hope with all the attention COVID has gotten, people will better understand the importance of vaccines?
That would depend on the public in general learning from COVID that it is important to vaccine. We're only at 45% nationally at the current time. And there was a published statement today that virtually all those who have died from COVID-19 in the last 2 months were not vaccinated. 0.8% were vaccinated.
Right, that certainly does say something. So let's talk a little bit about the future of the flu vaccine. Is there a universal flu vaccine out there? What is in development these days?
You are talking about the holy grail of vaccine production there. Dr. Fauci was very involved with it before COVID-19, trying to find some part of the influenza virus that's conserved across all strains that they can target a vaccine. The original vaccine initially was developed by Dr. Salk of poliovirus fame. And he was bemused by the fact that he had to change it every year after a couple of years' experience. It was first used in 1945. Since that time, people have been looking for some way to modify the vaccine such that it applies, and that is certainly the Holy Grail.
And the latest breaking news here is that we just learned in June that the National Institutes of Health just launched a phase 1 clinical trial of a potential universal influenza vaccine. It certainly sounds hopeful. Dr. Luber, thanks so much for joining us today.
My pleasure.
And thank you for joining us for this edition of VaxTalks. For more information, go to whywevax.org.